Hello, this is Paramjit Singh from paramjitsingh.com. Welcome to another episode of Passing Clouds. Recently, in the late November, Economist published an online article with the title Mindfulness is Useless in a Pandemic, with the subheading Living in the Present Has Never Felt More Overrated. So I thought we will talk about it a little bit because it does provide kind of a mixed message. It does mischaracterize what exactly mindfulness is and how people miss the point of mindfulness by a wide margin. So our central question here today is mindfulness useless during pandemic? In order for us to explore this question, we have to quickly remember what exactly mindfulness is. And it is being present to the present in the present and not reacting or labeling to the experience that comes in response to paying attention in any particular way, any pleasant or unpleasant way. So, that in a nutshell is about the central part of what mindfulness is. Now, when we read these kind of headings, what exactly kind of the message we get? Does it mean that mindfulness is pretty useless? Or does it mean that we don't really understand what exactly is to be mindful because it has been so thrown around through pop culture-ish connotations and definitions? Few things we need to keep in mind. One is that being present to the present makes us feel better if the fear of future or the burden of the past is scarier than the experience of being present. So that would mean that in normal day-to-day life, when your life is tolerable, being aware of your future worries or being weighed down by your all the things we have done in the past or all the things that has happened to us in the past would likely add to the negative experience of being in that domain. So being present in that moment would more likely be in fact in our favor. However, during pandemic, if you actually really look at it, present seems worse. The experience of being present is a lot worse than thinking about the future. Future without pandemic is a lot better than the future with pandemic or the present with pandemic. So it would likely seem that when we are talking about pandemic, we have to actually really understand the experiential part of the mindfulness, which is oftenly missing because we often people talk about mindfulness from a very cognitive, intellectual perspective. So during pandemic, the present seems worse because the experience of fear and all sort of things that can go wrong seems to weigh down. And future seems wonderful. At least in expectation, we can think that pandemic is more likely to end sometime in the future. Vaccines are around, people are likely might get into herd immunity. All sort of things are in fact hopeful. So that makes the present moment experience of pandemic a lot worse. So when you're thinking about future, which is a lot brighter, and the experience of present, especially if it is related to pandemic, is going to be a lot worse than in normal times. Unless one knew how to sandbox and navigate the fear and its related challenges. So that's actually the most important missing link when you read these kind of stories in very well established magazines and journals. That unless you know how to sandbox that experience that comes in response to paying attention, because once you pay attention to something willfully, naturally it is going to generate an experience, and if you don't know how to work with the experience, that experience is going to make you feel unpleasant. So that's why if you think of mindfulness as simply intellectual adventure, something you can think about cognitively, being present to the present in the pandemic is going to make you feel a lot worse because future seems a lot better. So that is a very important distinction we have to make, and which distinction oftenly get sidelined or blurred when we think about mindfulness, especially the mindfulness that has been presented and in the pop culture-ish way in the corporate non-corporate environment these days. So whenever you're feeling antsy in the present, unless you know how to work with the antsiness, it is going to be a lot worse than normal times. That's why people feel distracted, or they want to be distracted. That's why they would fill up their calendars, because they want to know what exactly is happening in their real life. In the same article, the author also conveniently cites a 2010 study published in the journal Science, suggesting that uh, in normal day to day circumstances, most of our mind wanders around 47% of the time. At the same time, it misses the point that individual whose mind wandered a lot in that study, and according to that study, they felt a lot less happier. So, even in that context, the part of the study that was mentioned in the article is half quoted, just to make a point that mind wandering is a natural part of human experience. And that's very much true, but that's not the whole story of the mindfulness. So, in the context of the pandemic, the prospect of the future seems brighter, thus making our daily experience of present a lot worse. Except if one doesn't have a reactive attitude to it. So, for example, if you have skills how to work with that pandemic experience, then mindfulness comes handy. It's a wonderful skill, especially in that kind of a moment when you're working with a fear, and fear of death, and fear of infection or harming your loved ones, or you have to be out in harm's way, especially if you are a frontline worker, or if you are a cashier and you have to stand in the line for 200 people filing past you. You are a lot more exposed, and that creates a kind of a sense of fear. And if you know how to work with the experience, the mindfulness is wonderful, because being present will actually make you feel more attuned to what is happening in the moment. And then, because you know the skill, you can actually work with whatever is arising at that moment. However, if you don't have the skill, obviously being present to what is really making you afraid is going to be a lot more unpleasant. This brings us to the main question: is mindfulness useful or useless during pandemic? And the simple answer to that question is it is useless if you only know mindfulness from cognitive intellectual perspective. If you've read about it, but that you have really not sat in the practice, you have not worked through the challenges of your own wandering mind and own reactive mind. And it is very useful if you know the mindfulness skills from experiential perspective. So whenever we're talking about mindfulness, and whenever we talk about being present, especially in the context of the unpleasant experience of being in the pandemic, we have to keep in mind ordinary cognitive intellectual mindfulness is going to go so far. In fact, it might, in fact, exaggerate your experience of unpleasantness and antsiness and fear. If you're interested in knowing more information about such topics, kindly check out our website at paramjitsingh.com and other podcast. If you find this podcast helpful, kindly share with other people, subscribe to our channel, and press the bell icon button so that every time I upload a new one, you will get a chance. Thank you so much for being with me. Stay safe and stay well.